From NBC News, this is a special edition of Today from Governor's Island in New York Harbor. Now, here is Katie Couric.
As Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty remind us, America has always been a land of immigrants. But that image of reaching out to the tired, the poor, and the hungry is being called into question on this morning before we celebrate our independence. In the early 1900s, 12 million Europeans flocked to this promised land, looking for a haven from tyranny and economic opportunity. These are the faces of those who came searching for the American dream. For most immigrants back then, this dream was realized. But now the faces have changed, and with them, a changing economic landscape has given rise to an immigrant backlash. Those shores are not as friendly as they once were. Dan Stein is with an organization called FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform. And Cecilia Munoz is an immigration policy analyst with the National Council of La Raza. This morning, she is at our NBC News Bureau in Washington. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Dan, let me start with you. Whatever happened to the expression, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses? Are Americans, or is America a land that was built by immigrants, souring on the whole notion of immigration?
Well, Katie, there's no question that immigration has played an important and historic role in the building of this great nation. But at the same time, it's time for a pause in immigration. Just like the great wave that passed through Ellis Island at the turn of the century was then followed by almost 50 years of very low immigration, it gave us the opportunity to absorb and assimilate those newcomers. In 1980, we had the highest level of immigration ever in a similar period in our history, and we need now another moratorium or freeze to get our house in order. Polls show that the American people, including Hispanic American voters, support the idea of a temporary freeze in immigration till we get control of illegal immigration, get unemployment down, deal with the question of our own urban poor, and assimilate those who've come in the recent past.
Cecilia Munoz, what do you think of this whole notion of a moratorium on immigration?
I think we really need to be careful about who it is that we're talking about. Immigrants today are really, the vast majority of them are the family members of Americans, people who are already living in the United States perfectly legally, most of them U.S. citizens. If we were really to have a moratorium on immigration, it would mean that U.S. citizens wouldn't be able to reunite with their spouses, with their own children, with their parents. It's what we're seeing from Mr. Stein is part of the backlash that's been true of this country for a long time, and which is a really unfortunate part of our history and doesn't really reflect the reality of hardworking immigrant families who come in and enrich this country economically, socially, and culturally.
Well, of course, you could reunify the families who are outstanding easily in line, but you know, the consequences of doing nothing would be that in the 1990s we'd get twice as many immigrants who came as in the 1980s. You've got 3 million people now waiting in line who want to come in. There's 100 million people added to our world population every decade. The situation like what we had recently from Haiti will be recurring over and over again, and for most people around the world, the solution is simply going to have to be that they're going to have to improve their lives where they are. Unless we do something about it now, though, we're going to get more situations like we've had in Los Angeles, more stress on our urban infrastructure, our schools, our housing. We need Congress to do something to bring the numbers down, and we think a moratorium or a temporary freeze is the right idea.
I think that's exactly the kind of exaggeration which promotes the kind of tension that we've been seeing in cities like Los Angeles and in other parts of the country, and FAIR is really expert in that kind of exaggeration. The fact is we have an orderly, legal immigration system which is based on keeping American families together, and that's just about the most American ideal and value that I can think of.
You know, one of the reasons why Congress is unwilling to act on this issue is because organizations like Cecilia's say that anybody who wants to bring the numbers down must be operating from improper motives. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the American people want to see immigration substantially brought down.
How much of that sentiment, Dan, is based on the fact that we're in a recession, that we're in economic hard times? Do you think when the economy improves, the sentiment will change towards immigrants?
No, I think it is based on the real perception that immigration has always come in big waves, which have given us breathing space, a pause, an opportunity to assimilate the newcomers. If you bring in another 15, 20 million immigrants in the 1990s, as we're slated to do under the current law, all of our major cities, New York, Miami, Los Angeles, certain parts of Texas, simply being overwhelmed. You don't have the housing and the quality of education needed to provide the first-class economic superpower of tomorrow.
Cecilia, are we economically prepared to deal with the influx of immigrants? I mean, we often hear about taking care of our own. People really aren't that sympathetic about sending aid to foreign countries. They want to help the people who are here already. Do you think we're prepared?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, the economic evidence is overwhelming that by doing the right thing, by bringing in immigrant families, what we're doing is bringing in hardworking people who revitalize our economy, who create jobs by coming into the United States, and who really enrich this country. That's why Congress passed, with overwhelming support from both the labor movement and the business community and a variety of groups, a law in 1990 that modestly expanded immigration in the interest of keeping families together and really revitalizing the country economically. Now, the only people to oppose that law was the Federation for American Immigration Reform, and they were out there by themselves.
We have a few more seconds to have the last word.
Congress increased immigration right when we were going into recession. That was a profound policy mistake.
Immigrants are not
and that's one of the reasons why
recession,
you might get an immigrant backlash, Cecilia. We think we can get some improvements with a freeze or a moratorium, and we'll be pushing for it.
I think that does a real disservice to the lady in the harbor behind you.
All right, Cecilia Munoz, Dan Stein, thank you both so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. And we'll be back in a moment with a special edition of Today from Governor's Island. But first, this is Today on NBC.